The mid-16th century saw Europe drowning in a deep abyss of religious division and chaotic political fragmentation. In the heart of Paris, King Francis I burned Lutheran believers alive in public squares to secure his trembling throne. Across the Channel in London, Henry VIII scraped every copper coin from his starving subjects to build a meager navy. To the west, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V strained every muscle to hold back enemies encroaching on his fragile borders. Yet, amidst their squabbles, the European monarchs remained blissfully ignorant of a colossal storm gathering strength in the east. A new power was rising from the horizon, forging a destiny that would eclipse their petty struggles. A new sovereign had ascended, bearing a name that would soon whisper terror into the heart of every European court: Suleiman the Magnificent, a figure of shadow and gold, destined to reshape the known world. At the tender age of 26, he already held dominion over a vast tapestry of lands and diverse peoples. His command stretched from the rugged Balkans through Anatolia, reaching deep into North Africa and the Arab sands. Yet for Suleiman, this immense inheritance was merely the foundation for a much grander ambition. To understand this hunger, one must look back to the late 13th century on the blood-soaked Anatolian steppes. In those days, small nomadic tribes fought tooth and nail, shedding blood daily for every inch of dust. On the perilous borders of the dying Byzantine Empire, survival was the only law that mattered to these warriors. Every tribe struggled desperately to endure on the jagged edge of a once mighty civilization. Time flowed like a river of blood, where the strong devoured the weak in a relentless cycle of conquest. Endless campaigns and skirmishes began to merge these scattered clans into a single, forged entity. Amidst this crucible of war, a young and visionary leader named Osman Bey rose from the northwest. From a humble and modest principality, he gathered fierce warriors bound by absolute loyalty to his banner. He expanded his influence not just with the sword, but with shrewd diplomacy and calculated alliances. From that small, determined nucleus, a dynasty was born that would shake the pillars of history. The Ottoman Empire began its inexorable march across the map of the medieval world. From the Balkan valleys to the rugged mountain ranges of Asia Minor, their war horses trampled every obstacle. Their reach extended like a grasping hand, claiming new territories with every passing season. Small feudal lords, terrified by the approaching thunder, bowed their heads to buy a fragile peace. They piled wagons high with gold, silver, and exotic spices, offering them as precious tribute to the conquerors. The Ottoman war chests swelled to bursting, funding a military machine that grew more terrifying by the day. This wealth fed a growing army, secured complex logistics, and built a network of unshakable supply lines. Such power allowed the Ottomans to construct impenetrable fortresses and recruit the finest generals of the age. They established an iron discipline within their ranks, turning wild raiders into a professional fighting force. This foundation granted them control over the vital trade arteries pulsing along the Anatolian coastline. And when the vast steppes offered nothing left to conquer, their eyes turned toward the ultimate prize. The Byzantine Empire, an ancient giant now trembling on weary legs, would be the next to taste the fire. The final golden glow of Byzantium was flickering out, destined to be extinguished by a new dawn. Sultan Mehmet II trained his massive cannons directly at the legendary walls of Constantinople. This city, which had divided east and west for a millennium, crumbled under the relentless Ottoman bombardment. The capital of the Byzantine Empire fell, marking the end of an era and the birth of a new world order. As the sun set on the Romans, the Ottoman crescent moon rose triumphantly over the dome of Hagia Sophia. Constantinople was no more, reborn from the ashes with a new name that would echo through time: Istanbul. In the days following the conquest, the new capital buzzed with the vibrant, chaotic sounds of a fresh beginning. For Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror, Istanbul was far more than a mere military victory or a trophy of war. It was the bedrock upon which future generations would build a kingdom of unparalleled prosperity and might. They would craft an empire boasting a thriving economy, an elite military, and a rich cultural tapestry. Decades later, in the autumn of 1494, amidst this growing legacy, a child was born. In a bustling port city on the Black Sea coast, Suleiman let out his first cry into the world. He was the only son of the fierce Prince Selim and Ayse Hafsa, a noblewoman of grace and intelligence. During his formative years, Suleiman lived within the gilded cage of the royal palace in Trabzon. Here, the young prince grew up in an environment defined by strict discipline and rigorous expectation. Every single day was dedicated to the study of culture, court etiquette, and the burdens of leadership. Hours were spent in mandatory Quranic studies, shaping his moral compass and spiritual understanding. It was during this intense period that the unique character of Suleiman began to clearly emerge. He was a quiet boy, introverted yet possessing a mind as sharp as a Damascus steel blade. He often asked profound questions that far exceeded his tender age, curious about the world beyond the walls. At the age of 7, he was sent to the magnificent Topkapi Palace in Istanbul for higher education. Historians would later remark that no prince was ever as well educated as Suleiman the Magnificent, and indeed, no emperor would ever rule his vast domains with such practical wisdom and intellectual depth. Suleiman mastered theology, literature, science, history, and the intricate art of military strategy. As a teenager, he became obsessed with the epic historical tales of Alexander the Great. It is believed that Suleiman's future plans for global expansion were inspired by the Macedonian conqueror. By the age of 15, Suleiman was appointed as the governor of Karahisar, a crucial test of his ability. This city held a strategic position, linking the heart of Asia Minor directly to the capital of Istanbul. Controlling such a vital location solidified the young prince's power and signaled his rising status. However, this appointment also threatened other ambitious members of the royal family who watched closely. Ahmed, Suleiman's uncle, realized that Karahisar was dangerously close to his own territory of Amasya. After tense negotiations and political maneuvering, the court decided to relocate Suleiman to the city of Balu. Yet even this change did not silence the whispers of suspicion or calm Ahmed's paranoid fears. Balu still sat directly on the road from Amasya to the capital, a gateway to the throne. If the Sultan were to die, his grandson Suleiman could easily block the path to Istanbul. Unlike the monarchies of Europe, where the eldest son inherited the crown by divine right, the Ottoman Empire possessed no clear or codified rule regarding who would become the next sultan. This meant that any prince, or even a distant relative, could theoretically seize the throne. The chance to rule depended entirely on capability, ruthlessness, and the support of court factions. Young princes were sent to govern different provinces to learn the art of statecraft firsthand. This system helped them gain experience and prove their worthiness to lead the empire. However, it also allowed them to build private armies and hoard power for the inevitable conflict. When a sultan passed away, rival heirs would immediately race their armies toward the capital. The first to reach Istanbul and secure the treasury was almost guaranteed to claim the crown. Controlling the military, the gold, and the bureaucracy was the only way to secure the throne. A century before Suleiman, a brutal civil war had nearly destroyed the Ottoman state. It was known as the Ottoman Interregnum, a dark period of chaos lasting over a decade. When Sultan Bayezid I was defeated and captured on the battlefield in 1402, the throne was left empty, sparking a vicious struggle among his 4 surviving sons. They deployed their private armies, tearing the empire apart to claim different territories. The common people suffered immensely under famine and the constant ravages of civil war. Cities changed hands repeatedly as brothers fought brothers for supreme control of the ashes. Looking back at this bloody precedent, the royal court trod carefully with Suleiman's assignment. They decided to send Suleiman far away to Kaffa, his mother's homeland on the Crimean Peninsula. This remote location kept him distant from the capital, reducing the immediate risk of conflict. Suleiman temporarily stood outside the circle of fire, safe from the intrigues of his relatives. But the empire itself was never truly at peace, and tensions simmered beneath the surface. Just 3 years later, another bloody struggle for power erupted within the royal family. This time, it was a war between Suleiman's father, Selim, and his 2 ambitious brothers. From his youth, Selim had displayed a terrifying and superior capacity for military leadership. During his time as governor of Trabzon, he built a fearsome reputation through military victories. In 1505, Selim commanded a force that crushed a Persian invasion. He defeated an enemy army nearly 10 times the size of his own, proving his tactical genius. 2 years later, he annihilated another invading force, cementing his status as a warrior prince. By 1508, Selim had expanded his control into the volatile Caucasus region. Small kingdoms in the west and center were brought under the heavy Ottoman yoke. Thousands of locals were captured and enslaved, fueling the growing Ottoman war machine. Although Selim showed brilliant leadership, his temper was volatile and his nature unforgiving. His father, Sultan Bayezid II, feared Selim's aggression and favored the eldest son Ahmed. Ahmed was given the governance of Amasya, a strategic province dangerously close to Istanbul. This favor signaled clearly that the old Sultan intended for Ahmed to succeed him on the throne. But Selim was not a man to accept defeat or watch his birthright be handed away. The Grim, as he would come to be called, began to plot his own path to power. He knew that in the Ottoman Game of Thrones, mercy was a weakness and hesitation meant death. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shape Suleiman's future and the empire's destiny. Suleiman watched from afar, learning the brutal lessons of power from his father's ruthless ascent. He understood that to rule was to survive, and to survive, one had to be stronger than all others. The shadows of his father's ambition stretched long across the Black Sea, reaching Suleiman in Kaffa. The young prince prepared himself silently, knowing his time to step into the light would come. He continued his studies, but his eyes were now fixed on the horizon where storms were brewing. The silence of the library was replaced by the distant thunder of approaching destiny. Suleiman knew that the blood of Osman flowed in his veins, demanding greatness and conquest. He surrounded himself with loyal companions who would one day become the pillars of his empire. Among them was Ibrahim, a slave destined to become the second most powerful man in the world. Together, they studied the maps of Europe and Asia, plotting a future that knew no boundaries. The world was changing, shifting on its axis, and Suleiman intended to be the one turning it. While Europe burned heretics and counted pennies, the golden age of the Ottomans was dawning. The sun was setting on the old medieval order, making way for the magnificent century. Selim's wars were merely the prologue to the epic saga that Suleiman was destined to write. The ink would be gold, and the pen would be the sword of the righteous conqueror. In the quiet halls of Kaffa, the future sultan waited with the patience of a hunter. The lion was young, but his claws were sharp and his eyes saw everything. Soon, the name Suleiman would roar across the continents, silencing the doubts of all men. But for now, he watched, he waited, and he learned the art of becoming magnificent. This decision to sideline him fueled a burning rage deep within Prince Selim's heart. He ignited a brutal Ottoman civil war that tore the empire apart from 1509. The conflict raged until 1513, turning brother against brother and father against son. In the end, Selim emerged victorious from the ashes of his family's destruction. Sultan Bayezid II was forced to abdicate, handing his weary crown to his ruthless son. On April 24, 1512, a new era began in blood. Selim officially ascended the throne, casting a long and terrifying shadow over the court. His eldest brother Ahmed refused to accept this usurpation of what he believed was his right. He gathered his forces and declared an independent government in the city of Konya. This rebel stronghold lay about 700 kilometers southwest of the capital, Istanbul. Selim understood perfectly that a living brother was a dagger pointed at his back. Ahmed remained the single greatest threat to the throne Selim had just seized. He moved his army with lightning speed to the city of Bursa to cut off the rebel. This city was the strategic key, blocking the road from the capital to the rebel heartland. Selim established total control there, tightening the noose around his brother's ambitions. Meanwhile, Ahmed tried desperately to buy time to consolidate his scattered forces. He retreated to distant cities, hoping to draw Selim into a trap that never came. On April 24, 1513, the final reckoning arrived on the battlefield. Ahmed gathered his army for a decisive stand against Selim at Yenişehir. It was a strategic town in the northwest of Asia Minor, where destiny would be decided. Although Ahmed commanded more men, his forces crumbled before Selim's disciplined wrath. They were defeated by the superior firepower and the tactical genius of the new sultan. Selim immediately ordered a brutal purge of the royal bloodline to secure his rule. He executed his two brothers without a moment of hesitation or remorse. All of their sons and every other male relative were silenced forever in a single night. The only one spared from this massacre was his own son, Suleiman. Yet even then, Selim looked upon his own heir with eyes full of cold suspicion. The Sultan decided to exile Suleiman to the province of Manisa. It was a region far from the capital, yet safe from the dangerous influence of Kaffa. Here, Suleiman was effectively isolated, cut off from the political games of Istanbul. During his time as governor, he lived in a gilded cage of his father's making. He only left this region exactly 2 times in 8 long years. Once to visit Edirne, a city resting near the modern Bulgarian border, and once to Istanbul, but only for a fleeting visit under heavy guard. As for Selim, his 8-year reign reshaped the map of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire expanded aggressively into the sands of Egypt and Syria. He solidified his grip on the entirety of Asia Minor, crushing all dissent. The trade routes connecting Asia to the Mediterranean were now firmly in Ottoman hands. These arteries of commerce became bustling highways of wealth flowing into Istanbul. New tariff policies caused the imperial treasury to swell to double its previous size. While his father conquered, Suleiman quietly proved his worth in his own province. He crushed local banditry and established a strict social order in Manisa. The people of the region felt the warmth of prosperity under his just administration. But instead of praising his son's talents, Selim grew darker and more paranoid. He remembered how he had overthrown his own father with those same gifts. There is a chilling story whispered in the corridors of history. It is said that Selim once tried to eliminate Suleiman with a poisoned shirt. The plot failed only because Suleiman's mother, Hafsa, was ever vigilant. She forced a servant to wear the garment first, saving her son from a painful death. On September 22, 1520, destiny finally intervened. While traveling from Istanbul to Edirne, Selim the Grim suddenly collapsed and died. It took 8 full days for the news to reach Suleiman in Manisa. He rushed back to the capital, heart pounding with a mix of grief and fear. He dreaded that this might be one final trap laid by his father to test him. But when he arrived, the streets were silent of war, and no rivals stood in his way. There was no bloody civil war, for Suleiman was the only lion left alive. He marched straight to the Topkapi Palace, the heart of the empire. He met with the highest leaders of the Imperial Council to claim his birthright. Thanks to his reputation and charisma, Suleiman ascended with absolute support. Shortly after, the coronation ceremony illuminated the capital with grandeur. Istanbul erupted in a riot of flags, flowers, and joyous celebration. Suleiman donned a magnificent royal kaftan of deep imperial blue. It was embroidered with exquisite gold thread, a symbol of his divine right. Upon his head sat the traditional large turban, marking him as the shadow of God on earth. A parade of elite Janissary guards marched in perfect unison through the streets. Powerful officials and viziers followed the new sultan toward the Hagia Sophia. From this moment, a new golden age was about to dawn upon the world, an era where the Ottoman Empire would rise to become a global superpower. It would be remembered as one of the most powerful empires in human history. However, power always comes with a heavy price tag attached. Suleiman first had to stabilize the trembling foundations of his vast realm. He listened meticulously to every problem plaguing his diverse subjects, from the chaotic tax systems in Egypt that bled the farmers dry, to the looming threat of the Hungarian kingdom on the Balkan frontier. To solve these issues, he first had to pacify the internal factions. The ghosts of the previous reign and the power struggles still lingered. His first target for reform was the formidable Janissary Corps. This force was recruited through the Devshirme system of blood tribute. Christian boys from the Balkans were taken and converted to Islam. They were trained from childhood to become the Sultan's elite soldiers. Severed from their families, they had no loyalty to anyone but the throne. In theory, they were the Sultan's absolute and unquestioning servants. Their superior combat skills and iron discipline made them dangerous. Since the chaos of previous reigns, they had realized their own political power. They frequently forced sultans to pay massive bonuses to buy their support. The financial burden of these demands was becoming impossible to sustain. Tension between the Janissaries and the throne had reached a boiling point. Selim had dealt with them by executing their leaders and ruling through fear. Such brutal actions only fueled their hidden resentment and anger. Suleiman, however, chose a different path from his terrifying father. He opted for generosity, increasing their wages and offering lavish gifts. He bought their loyalty with gold rather than demanding it with the sword. This bold move immediately changed the atmosphere in the barracks. Soldiers who had lived in fear now looked upon their young sultan with love. Historians of the time recorded a shift in the wind across the empire. They accepted Suleiman's mercy like morning dew after a scorching summer. But the young sultan did not stop with just the military. His next decision stunned the court and won the hearts of the nobility. Suleiman ordered the release of thousands of merchants and aristocrats. These men had been imprisoned by Selim merely for differing opinions. Conversely, corrupt officials who had abused their power were swiftly punished. The acts of justice fell quickly, executing those who had stained the court. Suleiman's reputation as the lawgiver began to take root in the public mind. With internal stability secured, he turned to the Timar system. This was the economic backbone of the empire's military machine. In this system, the land did not belong to lords, but to the sultan alone. The crown granted land rights to cavalrymen in exchange for military service. These Sipahi soldiers collected taxes directly from the farmers. They used this revenue to equip themselves and maintain order. The central government controlled everything through detailed tax registers. This allowed the Ottomans to field a massive army without a standing payroll. Yet not every governor was ready to bow to the new young lion. Immediately upon taking the throne, Suleiman sent letters to the provinces. He wrote to distant governors in Egypt, Mecca, and the Crimea. He emphasized that rich or poor, urban or rural, all were equal. Everyone must obey the law and submit absolutely to the Sultan's will. The governor of Damascus, a man named Al-Ghazali, chose to rebel. He declared independence in the major Syrian city, challenging Istanbul. Suleiman was furious at this betrayal so early in his reign. He immediately dispatched 15,000 cavalry and 800 infantry. They joined forces with the Anatolian army and marched on Damascus. A fierce battle raged around the ancient city walls. The rebel forces were completely crushed after only a few days of fighting. Suleiman appointed a new governor and reorganized the border defenses. This swift victory sent a clear message to any other potential traitors. News of Suleiman's strength spread like wildfire across the east. Yet, there were still those in the west who dared to test him. In Hungary, the Ottoman envoy sent to announce the coronation was murdered. This horrific breach of diplomatic protocol was an act of war. It became the perfect excuse for Suleiman to launch his first great campaign. He turned his ambitious gaze toward the fortress city of Belgrade. This stronghold sat at the strategic confluence of the Danube and Sava rivers. Controlling this point meant kicking open the door to Central Europe. It was the gateway to Hungary and the Christian kingdoms beyond. The time for peace was over, and the time for conquest had begun. The Ottoman expansion had to pause abruptly at the edge of the northern frontier, partly because of the crushing military defeat suffered back in 1456, and partly because they wanted to keep the Kingdom of Hungary as a buffer zone. It was a necessary shield against the rising power of the Habsburg dynasty in Western Europe. Until the time of Sultan Selim, the Ottomans maintained a fragile peace. They accepted tribute payments from Hungary in exchange for non-aggression. Suleiman, initially, had no desire to break this long-standing tradition of containment. Yet his gestures of goodwill were met with arrogant rejection and silence. After the death of Hungary's greatest king in 1490, true power in that land had slipped into the hands of greedy nobles. The national treasury was drained dry by decades of gross mismanagement. The new puppet king was forced to dismantle his own military defenses. He even disbanded the Black Army, the most elite mercenary force in the land. The economic recession deepened after a series of brutal peasant uprisings. In 1516, Louis II ascended the throne at only 10 years old. He was a child monarch, completely manipulated by the quarreling aristocratic factions. The southern defense line was left to rot in absolute chaos and neglect. The entire kingdom became perfect prey for the predators watching from the south. Suleiman held every necessary card in his hand to change history. If he did not seize this moment, such a golden opportunity might never return. In the spring of 1521, the drums of war began to beat. Suleiman donned a magnificent silk caftan embroidered with silver and gold. Upon his head, he wound a turban adorned with sparkling diamonds and heron feathers. The deafening cheers of the crowd fueled his confidence as he rode out. A colossal army of 100,000 men began to move like a tide. They marched out of the city gates, turning their eyes toward Belgrade. The goal was to open a direct corridor for striking at the heart of Europe. The Ottoman forces systematically captured the smaller fortresses surrounding the target. Strongholds like Sabak and Zemun fell one by one to the crescent banner. Belgrade was soon completely isolated, cut off from any hope of rescue. The Janissary Corps rapidly advanced to the banks of the Sava River. Ottoman artillery began to rain fire and iron upon the stone walls. Although heavy rains and floods made bridging the river a nightmare, Suleiman's army did not falter for a single step in their advance. The Sultan personally oversaw every wave of the assault from his command tent. He coordinated the siege lines and the artillery support with mathematical precision. Week after agonizing week, Belgrade crumbled under the relentless pressure. Finally, on August 29, 1521, the end arrived. The city was forced to surrender unconditionally to the Ottoman might. Suleiman stepped onto the conquered walls, his voice ringing with authority. He declared that Belgrade was now theirs, but this was only the beginning. This victory sent a shockwave of terror through the courts of Europe. The Ottomans now controlled the Danube, the river artery of the continent. They mastered the road that led straight into the belly of Hungary. Suleiman was fulfilling the unfinished mission of his glorious ancestors. Europe would have only a brief moment to catch its breath in fear. Before the true storm arrived, Suleiman turned his gaze elsewhere. He needed to deal with a persistent gadfly in the Mediterranean Sea, the island of Rhodes, a fortress of stone floating in the blue waters. It was controlled by the fanatical Knights of the Order of St. John. This force frequently attacked commercial ships passing through the region. For years, this island had rendered Istanbul powerless to protect trade. Acting as the gateway to the eastern Mediterranean, it was a strategic choke point. The Knights had turned Rhodes into an impenetrable fortress of God. The walls were high and thick, reinforced by countless bastions. The garrison on the island was armed to the teeth with modern weapons. The defense system was so formidable that all previous Ottoman attacks had failed. But this time, the story would have a very different ending. Suleiman was determined to conquer it, no matter the cost in blood. He saw Rhodes as the ultimate test for his new military machine. This victory would show the world the true power of his empire. A massive invasion was launched involving over 400 warships. 100,000 soldiers prepared to land on the rocky shores. In late June of 1522, the giant fleet set sail. Less than a month later, Suleiman himself arrived with reinforcements. War drums echoed across the waves, striking fear into the islanders. Civilians on Rhodes scrambled in panic to find shelter within the citadel. The Knights knew they had to prepare for a fight to the death. As soon as they landed, the Ottomans dominated the battlefield. Cannons poured fire continuously, shaking the very foundations of the island. The Knights of St. John fought back with desperate and holy fury. Both sides suffered heavy casualties in the grinding attrition, yet neither side could deliver the fatal blow to end the siege. Weeks passed with no significant change in the deadly stalemate. The people of Rhodes began to starve as supplies ran dangerously low, while the bombardment continued to hammer the walls day and night. By the winter of 1522, after 4 months of hell, Ottoman cannons had finally torn open the defenses of Rhodes. The Grand Master of the Knights knew the war was effectively over. The only way to save the lives of his men was to surrender. In the Ottoman camp, Suleiman granted an audience to the envoys. The path to the Sultan's great tent was lined with elite janissaries. The Grand Master approached, wearing his black armor of the order. His shoulders slumped under the heavy burden of total defeat. Before him sat Suleiman, majestic and cold as a marble statue. The Grand Master knelt on one knee in a gesture of submission. He bowed his head and kissed the hand of the Muslim Sultan. He then presented 4 golden vases as a tribute of peace. This act was a public admission that they were completely conquered. In response, Suleiman showed a mercy that surprised the Christians. He allowed the knights and civilians to leave Rhodes safely. He even granted a 5-year tax exemption to those who stayed. They became subjects of his kingdom, protected by his law. The victory at Rhodes became a major milestone in Ottoman history. It solidified Suleiman's reputation as a brilliant military commander. It also displayed a rare tolerance and generosity from a conqueror. Returning to the capital, the army was welcomed with flags and flowers. Cheers ceaselessly rang out through the streets of Istanbul. Belgrade had fallen the year before, and now Rhodes was theirs. Somewhere out there, enemies were trembling, waiting for their turn. In the council rooms of Venice, panic began to set in. The councils of Genoa whispered of the dark shadow approaching. Across the Aegean Sea, people worried about the next target. They feared the mighty Ottoman army would aim for Cyprus next. That island was the natural bridge between Asia Minor and Egypt. It was a land rich in grain and resources, a perfect prize. Or perhaps the Dodecanese island chain would be the next to fall. Yet these worries were perhaps a bit premature for the Europeans. The Ottomans were not yet ready for those specific plans. Because in Istanbul, a political earthquake was silently occurring. In 1523, Suleiman shocked the entire royal court. He appointed Ibrahim Pasha as the Grand Vizier of the empire. This position held the power to run the government and the army. Ibrahim was originally a slave, a convert from a Christian family. He had been brought into the palace to serve Suleiman personally. Unlike the quiet and philosophical Sultan, Ibrahim was a diplomat. He was decisive in critical situations and charming in conversation. One man was the thinker and the other was the executor, but a man of humble origin rising so high invited jealousy. Relying on his friendship with the king to become Grand Vizier was dangerous. It infuriated Ahmed Pasha, a nobleman of high lineage. Ahmed was the governor of Egypt and a man of great ambition. He believed the seat of Grand Vizier rightfully belonged to him. Ahmed decided to build his own power base far from the capital. He secretly plotted to secede and make Egypt an independent realm. At first, Ahmed had strong backing from various local factions. Leaders of wealthy Arab families hated the rule from Istanbul. They were eager to join this plan to break free from the Ottomans. But the political situation in Egypt was incredibly complex. Factions always sought to maintain their own private interests. It was very difficult for anyone to trust each other in Cairo. Forced to act alone, Ahmed made a fatal tactical error. He ordered the confiscation of weapons from the Janissaries in Cairo. He pardoned prisoners who had fought against the Ottoman Empire. Istanbul's spies immediately caught the scent of his betrayal. The traitors who had been bought off wasted no time in striking. They ended Ahmed Pasha's life with a swift and brutal assassination. His rebellion collapsed so quickly that it left the world stunned. History recorded it like a sudden thunderclap in a clear blue sky. It roared once with terrifying ambition and then vanished into silence. Despite the quick victory, Suleiman remained on high alert. He knew he had to act immediately to cut the rot from the root. In 1524, Ibrahim Pasha was dispatched to Egypt. He executed rows of men involved in the treacherous plot. He stripped titles from any official who had shown disloyalty. A new, rigorous surveillance system was established over the province. Egypt entered a period of stability that would last 300 years. But for Europe, the true nightmare was only just beginning. It was not Cyprus that the Ottomans desired at this moment. The Sultan had his eyes fixed firmly on the Kingdom of Hungary. After the key victories of 21, Suleiman strengthened his army. He built up a terrifying artillery force unlike anything seen before. Shipyards and weapon foundries worked at full capacity day and night. The machine of war was ready, waiting for a single button press. In 1525, the balance of Europe shifted dramatically. King Francis I of France was defeated at the Battle of Pavia. He fell into the hands of the Habsburg alliance, his sworn enemies. The Habsburgs now controlled vast territories across Central Europe. France found itself in a situation of desperate peril. From his prison cell, Francis secretly sent envoys to Suleiman. He begged the Ottoman Sultan for military aid against the Habsburgs. Finally, the perfect opportunity had arrived for the Sultan. In April of 1526, Suleiman launched his grand plan. Hungary gathered a massive force to defend their homeland. 30,000 men prepared to hold the line against the invasion. They were equipped with 80 cannons, a significant number for the time. However, the internal state of the country was in absolute chaos. Nobles were divided into factions, delaying the march of troops. Some refused to cooperate to stop the enemy at the Drava River. King Louis II failed to build necessary defensive fortifications. It was a fatal mistake in the face of total war. By early August, the Hungarian army had finally gathered together. They chose to give battle on the open plains of Mohacs. A bishop sarcastically remarked on their doomed situation. He said the Pope should canonize them all as martyrs immediately. On the other side, the Ottoman army was a different beast. In just over 80 days, they marched with incredible speed. 100,000 of Suleiman's soldiers crossed the flooded Balkans. Engineering corps went 5 days ahead to prepare the roads. Pontoon bridges were erected swiftly over rushing rivers. Food was transported efficiently by long caravans of camels. 800 ships sailed down the Danube to ensure supply lines. Any soldier caught looting or damaging crops was executed instantly. The Ottoman force moved like a single disciplined organism. They met no resistance from the civilians along the way. On the late afternoon of August 29th, the battle began. Hungarian cannons fired the first shots across the field. Tomori, the Hungarian commander, led a charge from the right flank. He had once defeated Ottoman cavalry and was full of confidence. Suleiman's front lines were temporarily pushed back by the assault. Tomori then pivoted left, aiming for the Ottoman center. He wanted to strike directly at the heart of the Sultan's formation. King Louis II spurred his heavy cavalry forward. The entire Hungarian army flooded into the trap set for them, but panic set in when they saw the true scale of the enemy. They faced a wall of cannons chained together in a deadly line. Suleiman unleashed a counterattack of devastating power. Janissaries fired their muskets in disciplined, rhythmic volleys. Ottoman artillery poured continuous fire into the packed ranks. The Hungarian right wing collapsed under the iron rain. Their cavalry disintegrated in the mud and confusion. Tomori was killed while trying to rally his broken troops. In just 2 hours, the battle was effectively over. The victory belonged entirely to Sultan Suleiman. The Hungarian nobility was almost completely wiped out. Only small, scattered groups managed to survive the slaughter. King Louis II drowned in a creek while fleeing. He died weighed down by his heavy golden armor. Suleiman stood before the body of the young defeated king. He spoke words of genuine pity for the fallen monarch. He had marched against him, but wished him no such death. The king died before tasting the sweetness of life and power. The Ottoman army waited cautiously for 3 days. Only then did they march into the defenseless capital of Buda. But Suleiman assessed the food situation carefully. Holding the countryside during winter would be impossible. He decided to withdraw rather than occupy the city long-term. The Battle of Mohacs marked the zenith of Suleiman's power. It kicked open the gates to the heart of Central Europe. Hungary fell into a deep and bitter crisis of succession. Nobles were deeply divided on who should wear the crown. Some supported Ferdinand, the Archduke of Austria. He was a Habsburg and related to the late King Louis by marriage. They cited old treaties promising the throne to his family. But another faction of nobles supported John Zapolya. He was the voivode of Transylvania and a powerful local lord. He possessed a vast army that had missed the battle. Zapolya was backed by Suleiman, but rejected by the Christians. The Kingdom of Hungary was sliced into 3 separate pieces. The west and north fell under the control of Ferdinand. The Central Plains were ruled directly by the Ottoman administration, and Transylvania became a vassal state under John Zapolya. The Vatican refused to accept this loss of a Christian kingdom. Ferdinand tried to retake the whole of Hungary by force, but the Ottoman military machine was too strong for him. It pushed Ferdinand back and seized the lands he held. By 1527, Suleiman was ready for the next move. In the spring of 1529, a massive campaign began. Suleiman gathered 300,000 men for this holy war. His goal was to assert total control over Hungary, but the journey through the Balkans proved to be a nightmare. Heavy rains turned the roads into rivers of thick mud. Many heavy cannons had to be abandoned in the sludge. Yet the army did not delay for a single day. They recaptured lost lands as they marched north. It was the launching pad for the most ambitious target yet, the Golden Apple, the city of Vienna itself. Capturing it would open all of Europe to the east. Vienna knew the danger and prepared frantically for the siege. They mobilized civilians, farmers, and mercenaries to fight. 20,000 defenders manned the old walls. They reinforced the crumbling stone with earth and timber. Wooden palisades and traps were set up to stop the Turks. They turned the city into an impenetrable fortress. By late September, the Ottomans camped around Vienna, but the soldiers were exhausted from the grueling march. The weather remained cold, wet, and unforgiving. Suleiman sent 3 well-dressed Austrian prisoners into the city. They carried his demand for immediate surrender. Count Salm, the defender, sent back 3 Muslims. It was a bold refusal that enraged the Sultan. Siege towers were erected, looming over the city walls, but the defenders launched frequent sorties to burn them. The situation turned into a deadly stalemate in the rain. One side attacked while the other destroyed their efforts. The continuous downpour destroyed the morale of the Ottomans. On October 14th, Suleiman ordered one last assault. It was an all-or-nothing gamble to break the walls, but Vienna stood firm against the waves of Janissaries. Defenders used long pikes and muskets to repel them. Suleiman's grand plan had failed for the first time. He was forced to give the order to retreat. The journey home was a trail of misery and death. Snow began to fall, burying their dreams in white. The era of invincible conquest had met its first limit. The road home was a nightmare of mud and ice. Horses and camels struggled to pull their legs from the freezing mire. By mid-October, Suleiman finally returned to his capital of Istanbul. The Habsburgs understood the immense strategic value of Vienna. They immediately reinforced their defenses, expecting another assault. Though he had lost many men in the snow, Suleiman spun the retreat as a gesture of supreme mercy. He claimed he spared the city to save lives on both sides. Thus began the long, cold stalemate between Ottoman and Habsburg. In Hungary, the people hailed Suleiman as a powerful ruler, but the dispute over the Hungarian crown was far from over. In October of 1531, Austrian envoys arrived. Representatives of Ferdinand stepped into the Ottoman court. They came to demand recognition of their master's authority. But the moment they entered, fear struck their hearts. The Sultan had prepared a reception designed to terrify them. 2 massive elephants stood like pillars in the courtyard. 6 lions and 2 leopards growled, chained beside the throne. The beasts symbolized the untamed power of the Padishah. The meeting ended without any favorable result for Austria. In fact, it only provoked Suleiman into stronger action. In April of 1532, the army marched again. 100,000 soldiers moved like a tide towards Belgrade. 300 cannons rolled behind them, shaking the earth. At Belgrade, another 100,000 reinforcements joined the host. Ferdinand watched this gathering storm with absolute despair. He desperately offered to increase his annual tribute payment. He promised 100,000 ducats to buy peace. That was nearly 20% of Hungary's total income. Yet the Sultan remained completely unmoved by the gold. To the Ottoman treasury, such a sum was a mere trifle. A single campaign cost millions of ducats to sustain. Suleiman sought submission, not their coin. The Ottoman army scorched the southern lands of Hungary. They captured the fortress of Guns after a fierce siege. It was a strategic key on the road to Vienna. But suddenly, Suleiman changed the direction of his wrath. Instead of marching on the Habsburg capital, he turned to Styria. His Akenji raiders devastated the Austrian province for weeks. They burned and pillaged throughout the month of September. Then, satisfied with the message sent, he returned home. He had not taken Rome, but he returned a victor. The people of Istanbul welcomed him with jubilant celebrations. But the joy was cut short by news from the sea. The fortress of Corinth in Greece had fallen to the enemy. Charles V had seized the strategic port in Morea. The Habsburgs were opening a second front on the Mediterranean. They intended to choke the Ottomans from the water. Naturally, Suleiman was ready to accept this new challenge. The Ottoman naval power was no longer something to ignore. Since the 14th century, they had held Gallipoli. It was the lock that controlled the Dardanelles Strait. There, they had built their first true naval base. Under Selim I, the fleet had expanded rapidly. Long galleys equipped with cannons dominated the waters. Each ship was powered by rows of strong oarsmen. The Ottomans learned from the Byzantines and the Genoese. They absorbed the best maritime technology of the age. After the conquest of Constantinople, ambition grew even larger. The shipyards of the Golden Horn worked day and night. They repaired old hulls and launched magnificent new vessels. This foundation was solid rock for Suleiman's empire. He was ready to claim hegemony over the Mediterranean Sea. To the Sultan, the sea was as vital as the land. Trade routes from Egypt and Syria flowed through these waves. The wealth of Anatolia and North Africa depended on them. The navy also had a sacred duty to the faithful. They protected pilgrims traveling to Mecca and Medina. Pirates and Christian knights constantly threatened these routes. This front could not be left undefended. The enemy had fortresses scattered across the western Mediterranean. Suleiman ordered a massive expansion of the fleet. For years, the shipyards hummed with the sound of saws. Gallipoli was upgraded into a premier training center. Warehouses were filled with timber, sailcloth, and rope. Every campaign would now be fully supplied from the sea. Workers were recruited from every corner of the empire. They received steady pay and regular rations for their labor. Maintenance crews ensured the longevity of every warship. By 1533, the fleet was ready to strike back. The first attempt to retake Quran ended in failure. The enemy fortifications proved too strong to break. But Suleiman was not a man to accept defeat. In early 1534, he sent the navy back. They besieged Corinth from the sea, cutting off all supplies. The blockade was total, starving the Habsburg garrison. By spring, the enemy was forced to surrender the keys. Corinth returned to Ottoman hands, restoring the balance. But Suleiman knew Charles V would not stop there. To win the sea, he needed a master of the sea. He turned his eyes to Harridan Barbarossa, a man who had risen from a pirate to a king. Barbarossa and his brothers commanded a private fleet. They ruled the waters of North Africa with an iron fist. They raided Italy and Spain with impunity. European historians claimed Barbarossa was richer than kings. His wealth rivaled that of small nations. He knew every current and cove in the western Mediterranean. He was the weapon Suleiman needed to crush the Christians. In 1533, Barbarossa was invited to the capital. Suleiman appointed him Grand Admiral of the Ottoman Navy. Immediately, the old pirate began a total reform. He transformed a loose collection of ships into a navy. He drilled the sailors in tactics and disciplined maneuvers. No longer would they fight like scattered raiders. They became a professional fighting force of the state. These changes ushered in an era of fierce naval warfare. The Mediterranean was about to burn with cannon fire. In 1538, the tension reached its breaking point. The fleets converged at the Gulf of Arta in Greece. It was the gateway between the Ionian Sea and the Balkans. Terrified by Ottoman expansion, Europe formed a holy league. Spain, Venice, and the Pope united their forces. Their goal was to hunt down Barbarossa's fleet. They vowed to destroy the pirate admiral at any cost. The League assembled a terrifying armada, 300 warships and 60,000 armed men. The Pope opened the Vatican's vaults to fund them. Spanish gold from the Americas poured into the war chest. In contrast, Barbarossa had a much smaller force. He commanded only 120 galleys. His 12,000 men seemed outnumbered and outgunned. His ships relied on oars and speed rather than size. They were armed with swivel guns and curved Damascus blades. But Barbarossa had something money could not buy. He possessed a genius for reading the wind and waves. On September 22nd, the Holy League arrived. They planned to lure Barbarossa into a trap, but intelligence reports shattered their confidence. The Ottoman fleet was already moving north to meet them. The League was forced to change course in panic. On the evening of the 27th, they anchored off Preveza. They thought they were safe for the night. But the next morning, an unbelievable sight greeted them. Barbarossa had found them first. The entire Ottoman fleet was sailing straight at them. The League scrambled to raise anchors and set sails. Chaos spread through their ranks as orders were shouted. 3 precious hours were lost in the confusion. The Battle of Preveza had officially begun. Ottoman galleys surged forward like a pack of wolves. Small and agile, they danced between the clumsy giants. Cannon fire erupted, shaking the calm blue waters. Barbarossa stood on his deck, watching the panic spread. The master of the sea was about to teach them a lesson. Between the hulking galleons of the Holy League, small Ottoman raiding parties leapt across the gap. They boarded the enemy ships from both sides like demons. The moment boots hit the deck, chaos erupted. Hand-to-hand combat broke out on dozens of vessels at once. The League's communication network was instantly severed. Confusion spread like a plague through the European ranks. The Great Armada was paralyzed, unable to maneuver or fight back. By the end of the day, the sea belonged to Islam. Barbarossa and his commanders declared a total victory. 13 massive League ships were sent to the bottom. 36 others were captured and towed away as prizes. Over 3,000 Christian sailors were killed or taken in chains. Miraculously, the Ottomans did not lose a single ship. Though 1,200 brave martyrs fell, the fleet remained intact. The Battle of Preveza shattered a long-held European myth. The idea of Western naval superiority was buried in the waves. Barbarossa did not stop to rest on his laurels. He launched immediate raids on Habsburg territories. Sicily, the breadbasket of Spain, fell into his crosshairs. As the Ottoman fleet approached the Italian coast, the grain shipments destined for Italy were completely cut off. Fear of famine gripped the Christian powers. They were forced to divert troops to defend the south. This distraction gave Barbarossa free rein to strike elsewhere. He hammered the city of Calabria without mercy. It was the vital link between central and southern Italy. The Ottoman shadow now loomed over Rome itself. The panic forced Italian cities to drain their treasuries for defense. Their already fragile economies began to crack under the strain. The situation worsened as Barbarossa targeted logistics. He systematically destroyed supply depots and ports. The trade routes that fed Venice began to dry up. With the Ottomans controlling the sea after Preveza, the flow of goods into the merchant republic plummeted. Food prices in Venice skyrocketed, causing unrest. The economic pressure became unbearable for the Doge. Merchants clamored for an end to the ruinous war. But there was another weapon Barbarossa used effectively. He rescued thousands of Muslims expelled from Spain. This act cemented his image as a protector of the faithful. It raised the prestige of the Ottoman Empire across the world. Local populations began to view them not just as conquerors, but as a stabilizing force in a chaotic region. Many small Italian ports simply stopped resisting. They realized negotiation was safer than defiance. Venice, isolated and starving, had no choice left. In 1540, they sent envoys to Istanbul begging for peace. The Republic agreed to pay 300,000 ducats. It was a humiliating sum, equal to years of their defense budget. They also surrendered their last island strongholds. Venice's era as the Queen of the Mediterranean was over. Barbarossa had secured the sea for the House of Osman. Having finished his life's work, the old sea wolf retired. He spent his final days in Istanbul, a living legend, with the western front secured by wood and water. Suleiman turned his gaze back to the burning east. The Safavid threat in Persia had risen once again. In 1533, he ordered Ibrahim Pasha to march. The Grand Vizier led the army deep into Asia. They captured Bitlis and the Safavid capital of Tabriz. The conquest seemed easy, perhaps too easy. Suleiman soon arrived to join forces with Ibrahim. Together, they pushed further into the Persian heartland, but the Shah refused to meet them in open battle. The Safavids chose to sacrifice land to save their army. They burned their own crops and poisoned their wells. The Ottoman army marched through a wasteland of ash. Persian cavalry struck at their supply lines and vanished. It was a war of attrition against a ghost. Yet Suleiman's discipline held the army together. They reached the fabled city of Baghdad in 1534. The great city had been abandoned by its defenders. Suleiman rode through the gates without drawing his sword. He established a new administration to rule Mesopotamia. The conquest of the two rivers was complete. For years, skirmishes continued along the border. The Persians used the rugged mountains to their advantage. The stalemate lasted until the mid-1550s. Finally, the Treaty of Amasya ended the conflict. Tapris was returned to the Safavids to keep the peace. But the Ottomans kept Baghdad and the Persian Gulf. They controlled the Tigris and the Euphrates. Suleiman was now the undisputed caliph of the Islamic world. To the west, he was Suleiman the Magnificent, a symbol of Oriental splendor and military might. But to his own people, he was something more. They called him Kanuni, the lawgiver. He built a legal system that would last for centuries. His empire stretched from Budapest to Baghdad. It contained 1,000 different tribes and faiths. Governing such a tapestry required absolute precision. The laws had to be uniform yet flexible. Suleiman allowed local traditions to survive, as long as they did not conflict with the Sultan's will. He did not force Turkish customs on Hungarian peasants, nor did he impose Anatolian land rules on Morocco. Greeks, Armenians, and Jews kept their languages. This tolerance reduced the risk of rebellion. It turned diversity into a foundation of strength. Yet everyone had to obey the rules of trade. Market standards and taxes were strictly enforced. Suleiman compiled the Qanun, secular laws of the state. These ran parallel to the religious Sharia law. It was a visionary act of statesmanship. Instead of clashing with religion, he supplemented it. He created a legal framework for the real world. Land tenure, taxation, and criminal justice were codified. He gathered the edicts of all previous sultans. He refined them into a clear and logical code. A governor in the Balkans or a smith in Istanbul, everyone knew exactly what the law required. Suleiman paid special attention to the Raya, the Christian peasants who worked the Ottoman soil. He lowered their taxes and protected their rights. Their status was elevated above the serfs of Europe. In fact, many Europeans fled to Ottoman lands. They preferred the Sultan's justice to their own lord's tyranny. Criminal law was also reformed and humanized. The number of crimes punishable by death was reduced. Fines replaced mutilation for many offenses. Taxes were fixed based on transparent charts. Livestock, minerals, and produce were taxed fairly. Corrupt officials faced the Sultan's wrath. Their property could be confiscated if they abused power. This stability fueled a massive economic boom. The reign of Suleiman became a model of prosperity. The Sultan was the absolute head of state. But even he was not above the law he created. He was bound by the Sharia and his own Qanun. He delegated power to capable men based on merit, not on birthright, but on ability and loyalty. An Austrian ambassador once marveled at this system. He saw sons of shepherds become grand viziers. While in Europe, birth decided a man's fate. Under Suleiman, talent was the only currency. Justice was the pillar that held up the sky. The Golden Age was not just about gold. It was about the order that allowed gold to flow. Suleiman had conquered the world with his sword, but he conquered time with his pen. His laws would outlive his empire. Visitors to the Sublime Porte in the late 16th century often noted a peculiar fact. The Sultan did not care for noble birth or ancient bloodlines. He sought neither the support of the mob nor the favor of the rich. His decisions were based solely on the character and ability of the man before him. Talent was the only currency that purchased power in Istanbul. The most critical decisions were made by the imperial divan. The Council of State met under the golden domes of the palace. Foreign envoys were forced to walk a gauntlet of silence. They passed through rows of janissaries standing like statues in stone. Finally, they would face the Sultan seated upon his golden throne. For friendly delegations, the court revealed its inner warmth. They were invited into the private quarters for lavish banquets. Guests ate from plates of solid gold and drank from jeweled goblets. Suleiman questioned them intently about the politics of Europe. He demanded news from the deserts of Africa to the courts of France. Observers often saw him conversing deep into the night with scholars. Historians and poets were his constant companions in the gardens. He took delight in the work of master jewelers and craftsmen. Some lucky guests were invited to board the royal barge. They drifted across the Bosphorus under the moonlight, walking with the Sultan in the gardens on the Asian shore. Most envoys returned to their countries with the same report. The master of the Ottoman Empire was a man of profound intellect. He could speak to them in their own tongues without a translator. Under him, the empire transcended its origins as a war machine. It became a state governed by law, mechanism, and humanity. Suleiman placed immense value on the education of his people. Schools were attached to every major mosque in the city, funded by religious endowments. They were free for all Muslim children. This universal access was light years ahead of contemporary Europe. In the capital, the Sultan opened hundreds of primary schools. Children learned to read and write the Holy Script from a young age. Promising students could advance to the prestigious medreses. There, they studied grammar, philosophy, and the logic of Aristotle. They delved into geometry, astronomy, and the sciences of the stars. Higher institutes, equivalent to modern universities, were established. They trained the next generation of judges, teachers, and clerics. These campuses were complete cities within the city. They included libraries, soup kitchens, and hospitals for the poor. Under Suleiman's patronage, culture and art reached their zenith. Craft guilds gathered hundreds of artisans from every corner of the world. Masters from conquered lands brought their unique skills to Istanbul. A talented apprentice could rise to become a royal architect. But Suleiman's talent was not limited to ruling the world. He was an accomplished poet, writing under the pen name Muhibbi. The lover, as he called himself, revealed a tender soul. His verses exposed a heart full of softness and longing. Most of all, they spoke of his undying love for Hurrem. "My heart burns in the flame of your love," he wrote to her. "Your beauty is my treasure, the only wealth I possess." The literary world flourished under his royal encouragement. Great poets like Fuzuli and Baki rose to fame in this era. Western historians admit no dynasty loved poetry more than the Ottomans. Finally, there were the monumental achievements in stone. Suleiman wanted Istanbul to be the center of Islamic civilization. He commissioned colossal structures to rival the ancients. The crown jewel was the magnificent Suleimani Mosque. The task was given to Mimar Sinan, the genius of the age. He was the Michelangelo of the East, a master of space and form. The mosque boasted a massive dome reaching 53 meters high. It felt as if space itself was bent under the weight of light. 4 minarets pierced the sky like spears of faith. They symbolize Suleiman as the fourth sultan in Istanbul. The complex was more than just a place of prayer. It housed the tombs where Suleiman and Hurrem would rest. It contained medical schools, hospitals, and nursing homes. Public kitchens fed the hungry, and baths cleansed the weary. It was a sanctuary that merged the sacred with the practical. Sinan made architecture the beating heart of civic life. Marble and intricate patterns were crafted with absolute precision. The workmanship displayed a mastery that defied time. The acoustics in the main hall were mathematically perfect. A single voice reading the Quran resonated softly in every corner. This technical marvel astonished all who entered the sacred space. Hidden architectural details controlled the flow of sound. Rows of windows filtered the light according to the time of day. The interior changed color like a living visual symphony. Yet for all his greatness, Suleiman was mortal. He could not defeat the cold, relentless march of time. By the 1540s, the signs of age began to show. The emperor who once charged into battle was now besieged by pain. His hair turned to snow and his beard to silver. Gout plagued his joints, making every step a torture. Despite the best physicians, his strength slowly waned. Loss followed loss in a tragic parade of grief. The death of Harriddin Barbarossa took away his sea-wolf. Then came the sudden passing of Prince Mehmed. The son he loved most was taken by the cruel hand of fate. The void in his heart grew wider with each year. On the political stage, his grand vision began to crack. The dream of conquering both East and West faded away. Expensive campaigns ended in stalemate and frustration. The Habsburgs and Safavids retreated only to return stronger. Victory seemed always within reach, yet always slipped away. Allies like the French proved weak and unreliable. Their lack of commitment fueled the Sultan's growing anger. He sat on his throne, listening to astrologers predict his fate. He wondered if his health would improve or if his throne was safe. The 1550s brought a storm of family tragedies. One prince was executed on suspicion of rebellion. Another son rose up and fled to the Persian court. He too was executed by the order of the state. Suleiman's health collapsed under the weight of these sins. Then came the final blow, the death of Hurrem Sultan. Without her, the magnificent Sultan was truly alone. The empire had grown too vast, stretching the limits of control. The bureaucracy he built became heavy and slow. Economic cracks began to appear in the foundation. In May 1566, the old lion roared one last time. Suleiman left Istanbul for the campaign against Shadivar. The Ottoman army cut a path through the Balkans. They believed the Sultan's presence would guarantee victory. Suleiman wore his ceremonial armor despite the pain. He rode out to inspect the troops in the early battles. But the summer heat in the valley was suffocating. Then came the relentless rains, turning roads to rivers. The ground became a thick, impassable quagmire of mud. Supply wagons sank deep into the mire, halting the advance. The Sultan was exhausted by disease and the ravages of age. His frustration was etched into every line of his face. By late July, his decline was visible to his inner circle. The warhorse that carried him for decades stood empty. Seketvar loomed ahead, a fortress that refused to fall. Its defiance mocked the dying emperor. The siege began with the thunder of Ottoman cannons. Iron balls pounded the walls from every direction. They prepared to crush the last line of Hungarian defense. Suleiman sat in his royal tent, surrounded by maps. He listened to the sound of firepower shaking the earth, but his own life force was fading with every hour. In the early hours of September 7th, the heart that had beaten for an empire stopped forever. The magnificent Sultan died in silence. Death came just as his army prepared the final assault. His body was washed and covered in a white shroud. The Grand Vizier kept the death a strict secret. Eunuchs and guards wrapped the body in wax-soaked cloth. They used heavy perfumes to mask the scent of mortality. The king was dead, but the soldiers must not know. He would return to his capital, but not as he left it. The era of magnificence was ending in a tent. History held its breath as the sun set on the Golden Age. The final ritual was performed in absolute silence. Inside the royal tent, the air was heavy with the scent of death. Not a single soldier outside was allowed to know the truth. The heartbeat of the empire had stopped, but the machine had to keep running. Shh. The Grand Vizier commanded strict secrecy to prevent a panic. Every decree was still issued in the name of the Sultan. The royal seal was pressed onto parchments by the vizier's steady hand. Physicians continued their daily routine to maintain the illusion. They entered the tent each morning with medicines and bandages, pretending to treat a sovereign who had already departed this world. Meals were brought in on silver trays at the usual hours, and the empty plates were carried out as if the Sultan had eaten. Meanwhile, a solitary rider was dispatched into the darkness. He carried a sealed letter of utmost urgency. He rode towards Kütahya to summon Prince Selim to the throne. The heir had to arrive before the army discovered their loss. While the king lay cold, his army burned with fire. The Ottoman cannons finally breached the walls of Seketvar. The fortress that had defied them for weeks began to crumble. The Hungarian defenders were swept away by the Janissary tide. It was a decisive and bloody conquest, the final victory of the magnificent Sultan's reign. Yet he was not there to see the crescent flag rise above the smoke. The army packed their tents and prepared to return home. They marched away from the Hungarian lands with the joy of triumph. But a strange heaviness lingered in the air around the royal carriage. The soldiers did not know they were escorting a corpse. They believed their weary Sultan was resting behind the curtains. It was a journey of ignorance and hidden sorrow. Only when they neared the city of Belgrade did the charade end. The Grand Vizier gathered the troops on a vast open plain. With a trembling voice, he announced the terrible news. "The Padishah has returned to God," he proclaimed. A collective gasp swept through the ranks like a sudden wind. Thousands of battle-hardened men fell to their knees in grief. They tore their clothes and wept for their father. The prayers for the dead rose up to the gray sky. It cast a pall of mourning over the celebration of victory. They had served him for 46 glorious years. Now they had to carry him on his final migration. The procession moved slowly towards Constantinople. The capital awaited its master one last time. A solemn funeral prayer was held in the heart of the city. He was laid to rest in the complex he had built, buried beside his beloved Harem for eternity. At the moment of his death, the map of the world had changed. The Ottoman Empire stood as a colossus astride the continents. It was one of the premier superpowers of the 16th century. They possessed a military might that no nation could rival. Their economic resources flowed from the Silk Road and the Mediterranean. The territory was vast, stretching across the known world. Suleiman's conquests had secured the holiest cities of Islam. Mecca, where the Kaaba stands, was under his protection. Medina, the city of the Prophet, flourished under his care. Jerusalem, with its sacred stones, was rebuilt by his order. Damascus and Baghdad were jewels in his imperial crown. His reach extended deep into the Balkans. From the mountains of Bosnia to the gates of Hungary, most of North Africa bowed to the Sultan's authority. The Mediterranean Sea had effectively become an Ottoman lake. This expansion shifted the balance of power forever. Europe looked towards the east with a mixture of awe and terror. The threat posed by Suleiman was existential. Ogier Geiselin to Busbek, the Austrian ambassador, saw it clearly. He wrote a chilling warning to his fellow Europeans. "The Turks have the resources of a mighty empire," he penned. "Their strength is unimpaired. Their habit is victory." He marveled at their endurance and unity. They possessed discipline, frugality, and watchfulness. He contrasted this with the sorry state of Europe. "We are broken, lavish, and undisciplined," he lamented. He asked if the result of such a clash could be in doubt. "When the Turks settle with Persia, they will fly at our throats. They will come with the might of the whole East. I dare not say how unprepared we are," he concluded. Yet Suleiman's legacy was not written only in blood. It was etched in the soil and the statutes of the land. A century later, travelers would still marvel at his work. French observers noted the strength of Ottoman agriculture. The peasants lived in relative security and abundance. The fields produced ample food to feed the giant cities. The state organization was a marvel of efficiency. Bureaucrats managed the empire with precise records. But above all, he was Kanuni, the lawgiver. His legal reforms were his true monument. He harmonized the Sultan's law with religious law. He protected the rights of the Raya, the tax-paying subjects. He tried to ensure justice was blind to power. These laws created a structure of immense durability. They acted as the steel skeleton of the state, even when weak sultans followed him to the throne, even when corruption began to rot the palace from within. The foundation Suleiman laid was too strong to break easily. It ensured the survival of the dynasty for centuries. The sun eventually set on the Golden Age, but the twilight lasted longer than any could predict. The lion rests, but his roar echoes still. From the domes of the Suleimani to the walls of Vienna, the story of the magnificent century is carved in stone, a tale of love, power, and the burden of the world. He was the shadow of God on earth, and when the shadow passed, it left a void that was never filled. The scribe puts down his pen. The history book closes on the 10th Sultan, but the legend of Suleiman remains immortal. In the call to prayer that rings over Istanbul, in the wind that blows across the Bosphorus, he is the eternal watcher of the city. Farewell to the Padishah of the world. Farewell to the era of magnificence. History moves on, relentless and cruel. But for one brief moment, he held time in his hands, and the world held its breath. Thus ends the chronicle of the magnificent. May his soul find the peace he sought, in the garden where harem waits. Beyond the reach of wars and thrones, only love remains. Only the name survives. Suleiman, the magnificent, the lawgiver, the lover, the emperor. Dust returns to dust, but greatness defies the grave. The ink is dry, the candle burns low, the story is told. Peace be upon him, and upon us all, the end of an age, of a giant, of the world.